I want you to go back to 2020. The NHL was in a bubble, the world was on pause, and the Florida Panthers, they were stuck in the same place they'd been for years. Irrelevant. They had talent, sure. Barkov was underrated, Huberdeau was flashy, but they couldn't win when it mattered. No identity, no edge, just another team floating in the middle. Now fast forward 5 years. The Panthers are the most feared team in hockey. 3 straight trips to the Stanley Cup Final, back-to-back championships, and a roster that's looked like it was built in a lab for playoff hockey. Fast, physical, relentless, and completely miserable to play against. This didn't happen by accident. It started the moment Bill Zito took over. He wasn't afraid to tear it all down. He traded the stars, brought in guys with bite, and took swings that nobody else would. Hiring Paul Maurice, signing gritty veterans, flipping the entire team culture in less than a season. While other teams chased regular season highlights, the Panthers built a machine built for May and June. And now, they're not just good, they're dominant. This is how the Florida Panthers built an unbeatable team. Like I said, we really have to go back to 2020 to fully understand the rise of the Panthers, because none of this happens without the hiring of Bill Zito. At the time, it didn't seem like a franchise-altering decision. Zito wasn't a big name. He'd spent most of his career as a player agent and then moved into the Blue Jackets front office under Jarmo Kekalainen. Florida brought him in to replace Dale Talon, and right away, Zito made it clear. He wasn't there to tweak the edges. He wanted to build something that could last, something that could win in the playoffs. His first season in charge was the 2021 shortened pandemic year. Most GMs would have taken that as a grace period, not Zito. He got to work immediately, reshaping the roster with smaller, under-the-radar moves that added up fast. At the time, the Panthers had a strong record of 26-12-4, which was essentially a lock for the playoffs. So Zito made the call. He was going to be a buyer at the deadline. Florida had the talent to make a run, and now is about reinforcing the structure and filling in the gaps. He didn't chase superstars, but instead made targeted, tactical moves to build out depth. First, he picked up Gustav Forsling from waivers, where Chicago dropped him. And then at the 2021 trade deadline, Zito brought in defenseman Brandon Montour from Buffalo for a third-round pick. Montour was known for his skating and puck-moving ability, and while he wasn't having the best year statistically, Zito saw potential and a need. He also acquired Sam Bennett from Calgary in exchange for a second-round pick and prospect Emil Heineman. Bennett had never really fully clicked with the Flames, but he had playoff experience, a physical edge, and a kind of high-motor game that thrives in a postseason setting. In Florida, Bennett found new life. He slotted into the top 6 role, and he immediately started producing and gave the Panthers a nasty in-your-face forward that they'd been missing for years. Individually, none of these moves really made headlines, but together they showed exactly what Zito was doing, quietly building a deeper, harder team to play against piece by piece. The moves paid off as the Panthers clinched a playoff spot and looked like a legitimate threat heading into the postseason. In the first round, they were matched up against the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning. It was a fast, physical, and at times chaotic series, but Florida ultimately came up short, losing in 6 games. Tampa would go on to win the Stanley Cup for his second year in a row, making the Panthers look like their Florida little brothers, but it wasn't going to stay that way for long. The summer of 2021 marked another strong offseason for the Panthers. After a competitive year and a first-round exit, Bill Zito continued to tighten the roster. He traded a first-round pick and a goalie prospect Devin Levi to Buffalo for Sam Reinhart, a dependable top 6 forward who had led the Sabres in scoring that year. Reinhart brought consistency, vision, and a scoring touch, all things Florida's forward group could use more of. Zito also re-signed Brandon Montour, Carter Verhaeghe, and Gustav Forsling, 3 players who had become important parts of the lineup. Montour gave them mobility and edge on the backhand, Verhaeghe added scoring and speed, and Forsling had developed into a reliable two-way defenseman. And the next season, everything came together. The Panthers, they were unstoppable. They led the league in scoring, rolled 4 dangerous lines every night, and overwhelmed teams with speed, skill, and relentless pressure. They finished the year with the best record in the league, 58 wins, 122 points, and they clinched the first President's Trophy in franchise history. Jonathan Huberdeau put up 115 points. Barkov continued to be one of the best two-way players in the league, and Sam Reinhart fit in perfectly. The team looked like a legitimate cup contender. But all that regular season dominance didn't really translate to playoff success. They got past the Capitals in 6 games, their first series win since 1996, but they were then completely shut down by Tampa Bay in the second round. The Panthers managed just 3 goals in 4 games, and they were swept out of the playoffs by their in-state rival for the second straight year. It was a harsh reality check. The offense had dominated all year, but it dried up in the playoffs, and the flaws were exposed. Winning in the regular season was one thing, winning in the playoffs was something else entirely. And that summer, Bill Zito responded again. He followed up the embarrassing second-round sweep by firing interim head coach Andrew Burnett, who had just led them to a President's Trophy and was a finalist for the Jack Adams Award. The move caught a lot of people off guard. Burnett had taken over mid-season after Joel Quenneville's resignation and guided Florida to the most successful regular season in franchise history. But Zito wasn't really interested in the regular season results anymore. He went out and he hired Paul Maurice as Burnett's replacement, a veteran coach with 20 years of NHL experience. Maurice had recently stepped down from the Winnipeg Jets, saying the team needed a new voice. Well, Zito believed that he could be the right voice for the Panthers. Maurice didn't have a Stanley Cup on his resume, and the hire raised plenty of eyebrows, especially after a 122-point season. But Zito wasn't looking for flash. He wanted structure and someone who could actually bring discipline, playoff composure, and an edge when the game slowed down and got physical. It was a bold move, but Zito wasn't finished because just weeks later, he pulled off the biggest trade of his career and maybe the most important trade in franchise history. Zito sent Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, prospect Cole Schwindt, and a first-round pick to Calgary in exchange for Matthew Tkachuk. Then he immediately signed Tkachuk to an 8-year deal, $76 million. Just like that, one of the flashiest, most skilled teams in the league flipped its identity overnight. Huberdeau had just put up 115 points. Weegar was a top-pairing defenseman, but Zito didn't hesitate. He wasn't building a team for the regular season anymore. He was building a team for the playoffs. And in Tkachuk, he got exactly that. A 24-year-old superstar coming off a 104-point season. Physical, fearless, clutch. A nightmare to play against. And most importantly, a guy who wanted to be the centerpiece of a team. The next season, the 2022-2023 season, was a roller coaster for the Panthers. It was a big step back from their President's Trophy run the year before, and they barely made the playoffs as the second wild card in the East. And things did not get any easier for them in the first round, where they had to face the Boston Bruins, the Stanley Cup favorites who were coming off a record-breaking regular season with the most wins and points in NHL history. Florida, they fell behind 3-1 in the series and looked like they might be done for. But then they flipped the script. The Panthers won a close Game 5, then blew out Boston in Game 6, and they forced a Game 7. Final game of the series went to overtime after they tied it in the last minute, and Florida pulled off the win with a clutch goal from Carter Verhaeghe. It was one of the most surprising comebacks in NHL history, and it gave the Panthers the confidence boost they needed to keep rolling. They then took down the Maple Leafs in the second round and the Canes in the Eastern Conference Final, and then booked their ticket to the Stanley Cup Final, the first time they've made it since 1996. Sure, they ended up losing to Vegas in the final, but the Panthers' run was still unreal. It showed how tough and gritty this team really was. No one expected them to get that far, but they proved that they could hang with anyone in the league. That playoff run wasn't just fun to watch, it felt like the moment Florida really arrived as a legit team in the NHL. The next season was when everything finally clicked together for Florida. They rolled to a 52-win season, racking up 110 points, good enough to edge out Boston for the top seed in the Atlantic. Reinhart exploded with 57 goals and 94 points, while Barkov set the franchise record for career points and won his second Selke trophy. But it wasn't just the offense that came together, the defense came together as well, as they ranked near the top of the league in goals against, and Sergei Bobrovsky was a Vezina finalist. Then when the playoffs started, Florida ran through the East. They swept Tampa, they beat Boston in 6, and then they took down the Rangers in 6 to reach the Stanley Cup Final again. They jumped out to a 3-0 lead over Edmonton, nearly blew it, but closed things out in Game 7 at home to win the franchise's first Stanley Cup. Barkov became the first Finnish captain to lift the cup, and Paul Maurice finally got his ring after 30 years behind the bench. The Panthers followed up their Stanley Cup win with another strong season, finishing with 47 wins and locking up third in the Atlantic Division. Sam Reinhart put up 39 goals and 81 points, Barkov continued his elite two-way play and brought home another Selke trophy, and Bobrovsky stayed solid in net with 33 wins. At the trade deadline, Florida made a splash by acquiring veteran forward Brad Marchand, a move that raised many eyebrows at the time, but it turned out to be one of the most impactful trades of the year. In the playoffs, everything came together. Florida started by taking down Tampa Bay in 5 games, then taking out Toronto in a back-and-forth 7-game series, and then followed it by a dominant 5-game series win over the Carolina Hurricanes to reach the Stanley Cup for the 3rd straight year. And they would be playing Edmonton for the 2nd straight year. They held their ground through a hard-fought series and ultimately closed it out in 6 games with a 5-1 victory in Game 6. Reinhart exploded with 4 goals in that final game, Bennett led the playoffs in goals and earned the Conn Smythe Trophy, and Brad Marchand had 20 points in 23 games and proved to be one of the best deadline acquisitions of all time. With back-to-back Cup wins secured, Florida has firmly cemented itself as one of the best teams in the salary cap era. At the end of the day, the Panthers' success didn't happen overnight. Bill Zito came in with a plan to build a team that's strong, skilled, and tough to beat in the playoffs, and that's exactly what he did. Whether it was trading for key guys, signing important pieces, or bringing in Paul Maurice as the coach, everything was done with a clear goal in mind. And the result of all that? Back-to-back Stanley Cups. The Panthers showed what can happen when you're patient, smart, and committed to building something that lasts. And honestly, it feels like this is just the start of something special.